I learned that changing worldviews requires much more than data. An ideology, when it's deeply ingrained, people don't know it's an ideology. They think it's the truth.
He worked with over 200 experiencers or abductees, yes, and he single-handedly became a lifeline for those individuals. All sorts of experiences, again, that take us beyond our limited understanding of who we are, what we are here for, and what the potential of us is. So transpersonal psychology, in essence, is a psychology of the highest human potentials, of spirituality, of the experiences that quite often we can consider as extraordinary human experiences. So something that really extends beyond our everyday understanding of, or even us being taught of who we were when we were little.
Welcome, everyone, to Cosmic Convergence, an experiencer-hosted podcast. Join us as we dive into the fascinating realms of extraterrestrial intelligence, consciousness, and more. I'm joined with my fellow co-hosts, John and Christian. Join us as we welcome Dr. Marina Smirnova, a renowned expert in transpersonal psychology, consciousness studies, and she shares her insights on exceptional human experiences. Thank you for joining us today and for coming on the show.
You're most welcome. Thank you so much. I would add that I simply study. I keep learning.
We all do.
Exactly. So, hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to share this conversation together. My name is Marina Alexandrovna Smirnova, and I have been acquainted with the transpersonal realm since I was a child. Really, I did not have the words for that, but I recall growing up on Sakhalin Island, which is immediately north of Japan, former Soviet Union territory, and I was about 4 or 5 years old. And I was sitting in somewhere outside with a friend of mine. It was government childcare, which was a place we really liked and enjoyed. And all of a sudden, I was with my friend and I was elsewhere at the same time. And the experience was so fascinating, but also so very gentle and so inviting and alluring. And my friend kept asking, like, "Are you okay? Are you okay?" I was more than okay. Let me share with you. I was so taken, if you will, by what is possible, but what is available, by what we can experience by day, and of course later by night. Those experiences came later on. So that was my introduction into the realm of the transpersonal, or the beyond the ordinary world. And it really changed my life forever, but it took me decades to find the words, especially the word transpersonal. That came much, much later. And so my journey began in Russia, as I shared. I was born on Sakhalin Island, north of Japan. And then at some point later on, my parents decided to move to the mainland. And they landed right from the far east of then Soviet Union to the far west, to the Polish border. So I grew up also and actually through my teenage years, and my associate degree, my bachelor's degree, was received in Belarus. And I actually began teaching when I was 18, teaching music, and I consider music to be one of the transpersonal arts. This is a multiversal language that is always with us, and I consider it also part of my transpersonal journey. And coming back here, coming to US, was not something I planned. I feel that this is a blessing and a twist of destiny, a heroic call to adventure that I managed to answer, continue to answer every day. It happened over 20 years ago and counting. And over here in the US, I received my master's degree in counseling, which was very traditional education at Central Michigan University. The cohort system was innovative back then, so we're talking about 2001, 2002. And yet not one professor has used the term transpersonal. I love them all, and I think they've contributed to my life a great deal. And after graduating in May of 2003, I felt that I need to find the more, having no language for it really, because even Carl Gustav Jung's teachings were skipped. Just a nod was, offered that there was Carl Gustav Jung, and now we're going to go to a different direction. Yes,
Mhm.
so that was kind of a mainstream, understandably mainstream focus, and so I had to find the transpersonal myself, and I had lots of help along the way. For instance, I before I even came into the transpersonal realm formally, I studied the indigenous healing arts and clinical hypnosis and guided imagery. And then, of course, the transpersonal world opened up. Specifically, it happened to me very, very strongly 2008 with the Vision Quest. And then it intensified in 2009 and actually led to my beginning of transpersonal certification in transpersonal psychology and holotropic breathwork with Stanislav Grof and his team. So that was a 2-year program. So that was my formal step into the transpersonal power. And that was March of 2010. And from there on, the rest is history. Once we find our niche, once we find the language, once we find the communities that hold us, the rest of it is just following what is unfolding for us and trusting our experiences and really knowing that we belong and we're here for a reason.
I agree. I agree. So for people that aren't well educated on what transpersonal means, could you kind of wrap that in any kind of not to pigeonhole, but to put it into some kind of definition that
Yes, yes, and
understand?
yes, thank you, John. And I believe that this word transpersonal keeps teaching all of us, no matter what our education level is, because it is an opportunity for us to go beyond to what we believe is just possible, right? For instance, let me share with you a little bit of perspective how it applies to human psyche or human soul, for instance. In a traditional model in helping professions, we most of the time look at only biographical domain of our lives, meaning we were born at a certain point in time in a certain family, right? Exactly. Culture, upbringing, etc. And what happened between then and now. Well, that is only a part of the story. And when we talk about transpersonal understanding of the psyche or an expanded understanding of the psyche, we're talking about biographical domain. We're also talking about perinatal domain. And we're talking about transpersonal domain formal. And perinatal is not prenatal.
Hmm.
Perinatal has to do with biological process of birth of each human being that has tremendous psycho-spiritual ramifications that becomes a patterning force for our psycho-spiritual processes of death and rebirth. And it has to do with dying to our limiting identities, for example, and being born into a much more expanded sense of who we are and our sense of self. And the third one, the transpersonal one, incorporates all sorts of experiences that quite often are misunderstood, dismissed, ridiculed, perhaps even feared, dreaded, and so on. It could be the experiences, for instance, all sorts of transpersonal or paranormal phenomena, near-death experiences with beings that quite often mainstream would consider to be hallucinations, right? Or something to that extent. Or even when we're speaking about encountering non-human intelligences and non-human crafts or vehicles or what we conceive as such, yes, would quite often use like, oh, we don't really want to talk about this. But this three different domains, Stan Grof postulated very well, and it was not a theoretical conversation because he has worked with individuals, with experiencers in a larger sense, right? Those who have not only experience with, let's say, UFO, ET, alien, non-human intelligences, but also experiences with all sorts of domains. Within transpersonal realm, for instance, it could be shamanic awakening. Yes, it could be Kundalini awakening. It could be all sorts of experiences, again, that take us beyond our limited understanding of who we are, what we are here for, and what the potential of us is. So, transpersonal psychology, in essence, is a psychology of the highest human potentials, of spirituality, of the experiences that quite often we can consider as extraordinary human experiences. So something that really extends beyond our everyday understanding of, or even us being taught of who we were when we were little. Yes, and the field keeps growing and it's very interdisciplinary. It relies on other disciplines to inform it. For instance, many of us know the late Dr. John Edward Mack, who
Yes.
was a well-known psychiatrist at Harvard, who really was the head of the psychiatry department at Harvard for a very long time, from 77 until his time when he transitioned on September 27th, 2004.
There are many paths to this expansion of consciousness, the awakening that can occur from unusual experiences, which Rhea White defines as anything which does not fit the scientific paradigm of the time. But there is a tendency, which I think is somewhat problematic, for us to have become rather specialized around anomalous. There are people who work with near-death experiences, and then there are people who work with past life experiences, and people who work with alien encounter experiences. Yet they all come together in a kind of confluence toward one, not one experience, but one domain.
And so even though he was in the field of psychiatry, right, he is a gift, a boon to all of us in any disciplines and all disciplines who care to understand the potentials of us as humankind, individually and collectively. And what transpersonal psychology has to offer, it takes human experiences seriously.
Good.
Very, very seriously, and it honors human experiences. And this is what the message I bring today is, if anything, I invite each of our viewers and listeners to continue to honor the experiences they are gifted with, no matter how puzzling, no matter how even traumatic they can occur, which is part of human experience. To me, they always bring some kind of boon to us. And yes, integration is required. And this is why we're having this conversation. Yes. How can we help to promote integrating our experiences or making them fully ours, making sure that they are not left alone in the back burners of our psyche, never to be retrieved, right? But just the opposite, weave by weave, conversation by conversation, night dream by night dream, community by community, but we welcome the fullness of who we are, and we integrate what was before unconscious to us or something we were not aware of, but we bring it to the light of conscious awareness.
I agree. We need to start embracing all of our experiences, whether they be considered negative or positive. As I said before before we started the interview, is myself personally, I've had negative experiences, I've had positive experiences, but when I take those experiences and I learn something from them, they help with my own personal development, right? And it helps me with maybe just a little bit another fraction of understanding about how wonderful and unlimited this universe and all of its creation is. And if I could take that into myself, that helps me see the world differently. And I think that if more people were to take that into account and pay attention to their personal experiences and not deny themselves their own personal reality when it comes to those things, then their own development will be better. and then they'll start understanding more, at least questioning to understand more, rather than just taking everything for granted by what we're told by somebody else that has no interest in progressing of the oneself. And we keep ourselves down too much. And so I want to thank you for that. I have so many points that I could make about what you just said. That was amazing. But I'll go ahead and give it off to my other gentleman here on here.
Thank you so much for that. That's beautifully said. So recently, been reading John Mack's book Abductions.
Mhm.
Fantastic book that I've always noticed with Mack was that just the compassion he had for the people he was with and making them where they didn't feel crazy or weird for talking about their very real, very traumatic, very ecstatic experience that they had. There was a lot of conversations that, John Mack was ostracized in his own field for that. And I kind of wanted to kind of ask you in that regard, why is that? Why is there not more of a open want for exploration in that subject for the just community at large and society at large? And why is it ostracized?
Yes. Thank you for asking. For full disclosure, I am absolutely deeply grateful to Dr. John Edward Mack for being one of our ancestors and for standing tall in the face of questioning that actually went on for about 15 months for him at Harvard, where his work was questioned.
I'd like to stress that much of this really has to do with kind of different experiences with the experiencers. I know that many of this kind of cold indifference that Bud describes, where we're just kind of laboratory animals, that's there's no question. And yet, at the same time, I've had very discriminating people who describe actual evolving, deep, profound, loving bonds between the humans and these beings that last over time, that some experiences describe as many times more powerful than anything they can feel on Earth. They have, someone will describe a mate that is occurring in this other reality. And again, in my experience, this showing, for example, of apocalyptic scenes of devastation of the environment, of the earth, of the pollution, is not simply to test our reactions, but is a kind of desperate effort to communicate something about us to ourselves. It is not apparently the way the universe works that we're going to be saved, as people say, well, why don't they save us if they can see all that? Well, it doesn't work like that. It works to open up our consciousness in some way to what's going on. Now, I have a funny feeling just here with you, and that we're going to have to go further with this ontological question, because we're slipping from into a kind of literalism about this. One of our most fundamental categories is this inside, is it outside, is it us, is it them? And even that category is up for questioning, it seems to me, in this phenomenon.
And he stood tall, and of course, you can imagine that the price that anyone would pay is a tall order price for that. And I'm sure that he has sacrificed quite a bit to stand his ground, and therefore to stand for the sacredness of studies. Yes, because he has taken his work beyond simply empirical. He insisted on the sacredness in science. And to me, it is an exceptionally valuable contribution. And Daniel, thank you for asking the why. Yes, I think that anything that we are not familiar, specifically, let's say in academia, is quite often looked at with suspicion, with utmost caution, and mistrust. Specifically when it comes to fields of development that are really on the frontiers, on the edges of development. And this is where science needs to be. This is where academia, if you ask me, is can be and should be. And I would love to be a part of it, yes, because these conversations belong to academia. But as you would imagine, when his research started at the time, really actively when he met Bud Hopkins in January of 1990. That first decade was very intense. He worked with over 200 experiencers or abductees. Yes, and he single-handedly became a lifeline for those individuals who could not go anywhere else, who could not form community, who could not receive individual proper care.
The world's gonna end. Maybe they're telling us the world's gonna end.
Why do you think they might want us to be scared?
Because because we don't look after the planet, the area properly.
And Melanie, is this an idea that you have had before, that we don't look after the planet properly in the air, or did this idea come to you when you had this experience?
When I had this experience.
How did those thoughts come to you? Did they come to you from the craft or from
From the man.
the man? And did the man say those things to you? How did he get that across to you?
Well, he never said anything. It's just that the face is the eyes.
What was the sense you got from those eyes?
He was interested.
High quality, compassionate, not only personal, but also transpersonal care that embraced all of the dimensions of who they are, not only the dimensions that fit into the pigeonhole of the mainstream thinking. And so, with that, I believe that reputations are to be maintained for academic institutions, yes. And I think that media had a lot to do with this. Unfortunately, as you know, that there are many agendas that are not quite often are not emphasizing the highest and best interest of humanity. It's my personal perspective, yes. And when media portrays certain experiences, certain individuals in a less than favorable light, it becomes almost like an institutional instinct to say, oh, let's stop this development. Like, we don't want to be a part of it. We don't want, let's say Harvard's name to be dragged through all of the media, which was a lot of exposure. Yes, I can understand those protective instincts. And I also would like to honor Harvard for concluding that investigation, that 15-month investigation, by giving the late Dr. John Edward Mack full freedom in researching whatever he decides to research. Now, that is something that was worth fighting for. I believe certain ordeals, and this is an epic ordeal that he went through, are on behalf of the humanity, and he won it for us. Therefore, we have an established already case that Harvard, one of the utmost respected and honored institutions in the world, has determined that academic freedom is of the essence. And all things considered, academics should be allowed to research whatever they decide to research, even if it is uncomfortable, or even if and when it is portrayed negatively through all sources of information.
And unfortunately, we still have in academia this, it's ridiculed, the experiencer and the psychiatry aspect of experiencers and abductees. Um, I had an abduction experience. Oh, heck, it must have been 12, 13 years ago, maybe even longer than that. And I was in college at the time, and I was taking psychology courses. And of course, at that point in time, I had always heard about John Mack and Bud Hopkins, but I decided, you know what, I'm going to take my own personal experience and try to look at it in an analytical way, right? But also as kind of a therapy for myself. And here's the time where we get to write our papers, and what is your thesis and what is your subject matter going to be and all that stuff. And I approached my professor at the time about the alien abduction um, thesis and John Mack. and Bud Hopkins. And I was turned down initially by my professor. And I was able to change his mind. And I loved him otherwise. I thought he was a fantastic professor. He was just very narrow minded. Again, institution
Mhm.
does not support that, by saying, well, no, I'm going to go ahead and hypothesize that this is the imagination of the experiencers. And then, oh, well, yes, but of course you can write this paper, John. I was worried that you were going to say that it was valid. And so after I wrote this paper, it was probably within the last 2 pages. I brought it back to my own experiences and what John Mack had with his therapeutic sessions through hypnosis, and was able to tie the two and just kind of leave it more as an open question rather than a determination to let the reader decide. And he accepted it, and I passed with flying colors. So sometimes it's how you approach the subject rather than just taking no for an answer, right? And so I think that we still have a lot of work that we have to do, and I do agree that John Edward Mack was ahead of his time. I think that he was one of those people that the saying goes that comes around every 100 years or so that makes a large impact on society and humanity as a whole. I do believe that he was a soul and that was his intent purpose to come down here. But it was not his first go around. And so I'm reading John Mack's books. It was a shame that humanity lost him during the time. I wish he could be here right now with everything that's going on, but yet he is, because he's still in the hearts and the minds of us all. And we can look back at his wisdom and his methodology and build upon that. So in a way, all four of us right now are John Mack, right? And so, and thank you for bringing him up. He's an amazing person. And again, I don't idolize anybody, but he's one of those that I put like within the top 5. And and we would be worse if we did not have him.
Yeah, John, thank you for speaking highly of Dr. John Edward Mack. And I am so glad that you braved
Hmm.
that situation in college and that your professor saw a way for you to move your ideas and experiences forward. That's a big deal. That's a
It is.
huge success. Good on you. Yes. And let me share with you too how 20 years, we just really acknowledged 20 years since passing of Dr. John Edward Mack, his transition really. So it was on the 27th of September of this year. We acknowledged 20 years. And, the transpersonal community is very much in favor of Dr. John Edward Mack and his work. And how I can evidence this is that the Journal of Transpersonal Psychology just last month has actually agreed and did publish my article honoring Dr. John Edward Mack, so that it is available to anyone who wants to take a look at this. The fact that transpersonal community is open and receptive to this vast domain of knowledge and expertise and the courage that he brought speaks a lot. And of course, we do have a lot of ground to gain. This is why these conversations, yes, because unfortunately, in mainstream, quite often, individuals who research UFO, ET, alien, non-human intelligence encounters are viewed as that they don't belong in academia, or they're venturing too far off. I'll give you an example. For instance, when I bring up this topic, and I also usually do it only when it is context appropriate. Some of my friends would say, well, only at this institution, only in that institution. I said, no, we're not the only one institution. I'm not the only one speaking about this. And this is where I gratefully nod to honor Dr. John Edward Mack for what he has done for us. And I'll share with you, it was really, for me, from personal experience, it was very interesting how that article came on. I think I've had that spiritual connection with the late Dr. John Edward Mack for a while, and I feel that in my subjective experience, this is something that he has asked me to do. And the fact that I was the only one who thought about this in terms of the Journal of Transpersonal Psychology, at least one journal, but still counts because it is one of the key journals in the field, also tells me that, yes, what we are asked to do in spirit, it needs to be taken seriously, because if I did not respond to his request in the spirit, I would not have written the article honoring his life. But it is not only honoring his life and his legacy, it is also honoring human legacy, human present, and human future.
I think that none of us would actually be here on this podcast if we didn't have that kind of a pull to do so. And I just wanted to preface this, and then I did have a question, but I wanted to preface this with a quote from a book by Dr. Alan Ross Huguenot. Name of the book is The New Science of Consciousness Survival. And he mentions a quote, I forgot who originated the quote, but science advances one death at a time.
Yeah.
And we have to wait for the old leaders to get out of the way so that we can progress, because there are many who are stuck in their ways, and then there are many who are open, especially in the younger age that takes over. But just to bring some validation for some people, I've brought this up before, but there are facilities, researchers, doctors that are investigating what's known as filter theory. So consciousness being filtered through the brain, but the brain not being the source of the consciousness. And there's a lot more evidence to show that that is the case than the opposite to the old model of materialism. And one of the things that they found is what's called veridical evidence. So that's when it could be either, let's say, a child of like under 5, let's say, um, having a past life experience and giving valid information that they can actually track and retrieve. It can be from a near-death experiencer who says, like Dr. Bruce Grayson had mentioned this. He said there was a child in one of his cases who had mentioned that his sister had passed away, that he could see her in the experience with his deceased relatives, like grandma, grandpa. And he's like, it's weird. My sister was there too, but everyone in the family in the hospital thought that was weird because, as far as anyone knew, his sister was alive. And because it worried them so much, they're like, let's call her, see what's going on. If, and if anything, then, maybe he's just delusional or whatever. And sure enough, they called the college where she was staying, and she died, and nobody knew. So it's like, how are they getting this information? And it's accurate to prove that there is, in fact, something actually happening. And my question to you was, in terms of like near-death experiences, for example, is there anything you can say to how, especially like in the field of psychology, how you could have one person of a personality type and go through a near-death experience? Let's say they were kind of not the nicest person around prior to the NDE, and then afterwards they have a complete shift in personality, coming back more humble, more understanding, loving. And in fact, whenever you ask them to recall the memories of such an event, if you have knowledge of any of this, if they have, they can pull up the memory as if you, like, they have a photocopy of it, they can just grab and even fall back into the same emotions as if, it was happening just now. That sort of aspect. If you can touch on any of that, it doesn't really
Yeah.
matter where. But.
Thank you, Christian. Yes, I like that our we have kind of sense of boundless conversation. We just keep weaving together, and I really appreciate that. So yes, I believe it was Planck who said that science advances one funeral at a time. Yes, and it is sad, and it because that saying has circulated for so long and is still included in most recent literature too. For instance, Keith Thompson in his book, The UFO Paradox, has included that quote. So, and it's interesting and synchronistic that you bring this up. I was like, oh, I just saw this quote in Keith Thompson's book, yes, and that's, again, you had no way of knowing, right, that
There
I
are
just
no
read.
coincidences. Yeah.
Right, and I actually wrote review, but it still is in production also for the Journal of Transpersonal Psychology. It's just a review of that book, and that's synchronicity, right? And so, if I could start even here, for Carl Gustav Jung, who contributed a tremendous deal of knowledge and research to actually initiate much deeper perspective into transpersonal experiences, what we can call now, right? And of course, he was moving it through the lenses of analytical psychology with full intention to establish psychology as a legitimate science, but also bring in the spiritual dimensions all in. And without psychology being ridiculed, right? So that was also a very tall order to navigate it. And for him, the synchronicity is a meaningful, a causal is in one word, right? A causal connection between inner events and outer events, right? So you and I have just experienced, and all of us are witnessing synchronicity. You're giving the quote, and I was like, oh, okay, that's it. There you go. Here's where it is. And to your question, I could speak from, the answers could be many, right? But I could speak from one perspective that I believe that all of us can relate in some way. So one of transpersonal wise ones, if you will, in my opinion, is the late Dr. David R. Hawkins. I'm in Sedona now, and this is where he spent many of his last years before he transitioned. And he was also a psychiatrist in the U.S. who held not only an MD but also a Ph.D. degree. And he has developed something that is, to me, is invaluable. It's a scale of consciousness. It's a map of consciousness, a map of truth, if you will, that begins with 1 and culminates at 1000. And it reflects the human consciousness that we can experience in the body here on Earth, and that our nervous system, as it is right now, can hold. Right. And of course, that scale goes much further, but that would be for, let's say, archangels are at 50,000. And we humans, the very best, the human avatars are at 1,000, right? Jesus, Buddha, etc. Many others. For near-death experiences, what David R. Hawkins taught us is that before near-death experience, typically there is a jump in consciousness. And there's also a jump thereafter. And that is not so for out-of-body experiences, for instance, according to what he has learned and what he has figured out. And he has developed that system not simply as an intellectual theoretical exercise. He used actually muscle testing to navigate all of this and to give it numbers. And this whole scale is logarithmic. So a shift, let's say, by 2 points, by 5 points, it's more than just it would be just in numbers, right? So for me, I would utilize that angle to offer a perspective. Why would a person, after near-death experience, would have a significant increase in consciousness, if you will, in conscientiousness, in how they're approaching life themselves and others. Why? Because that jump before, and we can say it's a transpersonal mystery, why would there be a jump before in consciousness before a person would experience near-death experience, for instance, right? But there's also one after. And in essence, it's a reality-shattering experience. And this term, something that Dr. John Edward Mack utilized, something that it's one of many experiences that really allows us to understand, the reality is not what I thought it is. And now that I am back in terms of near-death experiences, right? I am given a new list of on life, and quite often there is some form of a contract, whether formal, informal, spoken, unspoken, that is happening, because I've spoken with a number of individuals who shared with me that they have had some form of a contract. They had a choice, right?
Mhm.
So, and there is a contract, and they have decided, okay, I'm going to accept this because my work is not complete yet, and
Yep.
here's the support I'm going to receive, and here's what I need to change about my
Mhm.
life, right? And so it may not be true for all, and it doesn't have to be, but when it's true for enough individuals, that we could at least see that there is one of many patterns, right? We could see that that is a part of the conversation. So my question is, could it be that experiences that are reality shattering, that are very deeply evocative, that actually break the veil of misunderstanding, right, and limited understanding, and lift the veils of limited identities? Could this be that they, in and out of themselves, are changing us forever, and therefore they're changing our bloodlines and humanity at large?
Yeah.
Because
Perfect.
when we think of Carl Gustav Jung's teachings, and to me, one of many reasons why his teachings are important for us to look at when we work with experiencers, when we work with our own experiences of transpersonal nature, such as encounters with non-human intelligence, right? For instance, why it's important, because he has postulated that we not only have the individual unconscious, which Freud was very good at articulating, right? He really gave us a lot to work with. But Carl Gustav Jung said there is also what is called a collective unconscious, or the treasure of the humanity treasure chest that each and all of us draw from, and each and all of us contribute to. All right. So, in that essence, everything that we work out for ourselves individually is a
Mhm.
tremendous contribution to humanity, because it's not selfish to continue to work on integrating what is evocative for us, what is just completely mind blowing, right? Intellectually, spiritually, physiologically, because we have nervous system that has to sustain this, right? By day and by
Right.
night, frankly. Yes. And how do we continue to cultivate that attitude of compassion for ourselves and for each other, and for human beings who experience things that we cannot even imagine, right? We may have our version of this, but experiences, as you know, can the continuum is quite incredible. But what if we were to cultivate that compassion instead of judgment? What if
Mhm.
we were to say, wow, what an incredible experience, I'm so glad for you, thank you for
Mhm.
sharing, rather than come with judgment or shifting the conversation, because we don't have to have all of the maps that we need. It's great when we have that expanded cartography of the psyche, which I mentioned earlier, right? With biographical, perinatal, and transpersonal domains. It's wonderful when we have it. But even if we don't, that human sense of presence and best understanding that we can offer and support, and suspending the disbelief and judgmental urge, if you will, this goes a long way, very long way. So take a look at that scale a little bit closer. Remember, I mentioned that scale by David R. Hawkins,
Mhm.
scale of consciousness. So what he was able to calibrate with his colleagues is that on that scale from 1 to 1,000, there are two fundamental numbers, if you will, or line, if you will, right, that are really game changers. One is at the domain of 200, and the second one is a domain of 500. Now, 200 is the level of courage, and 500 on that scale is the level of love. And that is a really,
I
really,
think that scale, I've seen it now. I've used
I
it
know you
actually. Now
have.
it came back to me. Now I can see it. Yeah, okay. I know what you're talking
Yeah,
about.
Christian, thank you so much.
Continue.
And yes, and anyone from our viewers and listeners, please, you can Google David R. Hawkins' Map of Consciousness, And it's right there at your fingertips. And of course, there are different variations of the scale, but you can get a very good idea about this. So, yes, anything that goes below 200 on that scale, such as, let's say, apathy and shame and fear and pride, even, right? It's still not quite courage, right? Uh, Unfortunately, when we are in those territories for too long, especially too long if we set up camp there, we tend to attract a detriment from the universe, the multiverse, if you will. But when we manage somehow to say, yes, I am willing to face reality as it is. I'm willing to take responsibility. I'm willing to incorporate a measure of courage that it takes for me to lift my own consciousness, right? And to take responsibility and to be open to what life has to offer. We rise together. So think of intellectual domain on that scale is the domain of 400s. And that is a pivotal also point for all of us here and also for our viewers and listeners, because it's very interesting to connect how academia and science are so very valuable and so very important. And they're not the end game. They're just not. Because in academia, for instance, in intellectual domain, from 400 to 499, we have Einstein at 499. We have Freud at 499 and others. But we have also Carl Gustav Jung, who is in 500s.
Right.
Okay. So what happens here? Yes, we are on intellectual domain alone cannot help us to understand who we are, what we are here to do, and to actually welcome the possibility of the transpersonal wisdom. But at 500, the dogs are wagging their tails. The birds are chirping. Yes. At 540, we have unconditional love, which is healing in and out of itself. It's a field, right? It's a field that which we enter, we tend to heal. And so on. At 600, 700, we have levels of enlightenment, and it goes on. But in essence, by choosing even at 540 to offer unconditional love, which David R. Hawkins really felt that choosing the 540 as a goal is a very realistic goal for humans. Choosing the 540 unconditional love, all of a sudden, we are increasing our own vibration. We're healing our own selves. We are offering healing to others, and we're able to hold the experiences of others, no matter how mind-blowing they are, no matter how evocative they are, how reality-shattering and mind-shattering they are. We're able to hold them appropriately.
I think
John, I
that's
didn't mean to interrupt you. Oh,
also.
go ahead. Go ahead,
No, I was
Christian.
just gonna quick comment. I was just gonna say that I think that's what we're in right now, the age. I think everyone here could say that we all feel some kind of a shift in awareness happening where people like you exist talking about this information and sharing that, and more people are getting curious about it and starting to accept that information, and even talking about those charts ranging from fear to love. And as I like to say, it's what you put out, you get back, and the universe reflects that to you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Christian. And John, didn't mean to
I'm
interrupt
sorry.
you.
I'm sorry. No, 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 no. I'm chomping at the bit over here, and I apologize to everybody. I'll
Oh,
try to make this brief, but I'm terrible at making things brief. So I'm fascinated because it's making me ponder something that's happened in the past. In a way, I was a somewhat of a small spectator to it. It was mostly my father. A little bit of background history. My father was adopted, and he had 6 other siblings that were also adopted when his natural father died. And his entire life was guilt ridden, and so he was always on that low scale, right? He was perpetually in that low scale. Anytime he would succeed, he would tell himself that he was not worthy of success, and he would go back down, and he'd go back down. Well, he did make a lot of good life choices. I'm really summarizing, okay? But he always had that spark where his intuition, or he had this knowledge, or this consciousness that was not standard, but he would always ignore it. So I had moved out, I had moved him in. He was in and out of my life all the time. I had moved him in because he was almost homeless. Met my fiance, moved away. I'm at work. He calls me up and he says, "You know what?" He goes, "I was here in the living room and my dad came to me And my dad said, "I'm so sorry that I wasn't there for you as you were growing up," because I think he died when my dad was like 4 or 5. And then afterwards, his mother came to him and said, "I'm sorry that I gave you up for adoption. I should have taken care of you." But they both said, "We love you." And then one of his older brothers came by and said, "Mike, miss you. Want to let you know that everything's okay, that everything is going to turn out wonderful. We love you, and we can't wait to see you again." Right. And you're talking about these levels of consciousness, and I'm thinking to myself, maybe I'm hoping for the best. I don't know. I wasn't there. I'm not my father, right? And what he was experiencing at the time. But the way that he was talking to me was just so matter of fact. And usually when you bring up these things to him, the paranormal, the phenomena, anything like that, he was opposite to my mother. My mother was the one that was feeding me good healthy food about that. My father was always like, yeah, he, better to make money and blow it at a casino than it is to have any responsibility or believe any of that stuff. And he told me that, and of course, naturally, I'm like, well, okay, I'm accepting of it because I've had my experiences, but it didn't sink in. Okay, it didn't sink in, but it seemed to be profound for him. And I was busy at work, and sorry, Dad, got to go. Typical every day. You expect your father's going to be there the next day. Well, he called me a couple days later and I didn't get the phone call or I didn't get the call and I was too busy and I didn't call him back. Right. And then a few days after that, my uncle calls, "Hey, I found your dad dead." And I'm thinking that he had that conscious going off that scale. He was down here and then he had contact of some sort, spirits, entities, doesn't matter, it's all the same. And that raised his consciousness enough to prepare him for when he was unalived, as people like to say now, and to move on to that transition period, which you so beautifully state. It was that step. Maybe am I wrong on this? But I just feel like that was that his excuse me, his own personal step in development for that. And that's just amazing. That's what I'm taking out of what you've kind of been saying, but more on his own personal level. But that does radiate outward because it has an effect on me just speaking about it to you right now, right? And anybody that might be listening. So it is a ripple effect. It is that non-local consciousness, but it's non-local love. It's non-local understanding that envelops us all, and we have to tune into it. And it sometimes is those my theory is those instances where it's almost right before that transitionary period, or and I'm not saying someone should do it or shouldn't do it, but some people will experience it through NDEs, but some people will experience these things through psychedelics or through religious prayer or shamanistic practices. Like I had a sweat lodge I went to one time, and it had a profound experience to me when I got out of the lodge and I looked up at the sky, and I felt the love of the
Even
universe.
meditation.
Yeah, again, meditation, all that
Mhm.
stuff. And this is my father's experience. And so now when you've brought that up as far as that sliding scale, and maybe it fits in there somewhere, correct me again if I'm wrong, but it just it makes me think of more of the beauty of it. And maybe at that point in time, I wasn't meant to fully understand my father's experience, but now maybe a little bit more insight, thoughts. I don't know. I'm babbling at this point.
John, thank you for this treasure. Thank you for entrusting us with this experience. We hold it with love and appreciation. And thank you for trusting yourself in this too. And I will simply share that when my dad was transitioning, I was in the US, and he at that time was on Sakhalin Island. I was not able to travel at that time. It was 2016. And yet Skype was only available intermittently, but we were able to talk on the phone. But I really wanted to see him. And so finally, extended family were able to bring the computer and make sure internet is working, and to offer me an opportunity to speak with him via Skype. And it was on a Sunday. And when we spoke on Skype, and there's something in me that I absolutely wanted to see him, which both of us knew that he is going to transition. It was just a matter of time. But what I didn't realize is when I saw him on Skype, I did not see my father. I saw a saint. And believe me, he did not live his life as a saint. That was not his repertoire. He was an incredibly generous, hardworking, loving, passionate person. He certainly was not a saint. But whom I saw was a sage, if you will. And this is where experiences like this, and of course he transitioned the next morning. So it was by the sheer grace of the divine that I was able to connect with him via video, not simply by phone. And I am absolutely convinced that he has made his own leap in consciousness, absolutely on his own accord. It's a mystery how that happened. And I believe that it requires willingness from each of us in our own ways to be open to that possibility while we're living during the time when transitions come of various kinds, including the transition from this life into a different world, into the spirit realm, if you will. We're leaving the body behind, but if you ask me, we go on. And this is something Christian also connects to, something you shared too. I acknowledge consciousness is primary. I'm among many others who does so. And therefore, the possibilities are many, and we're offered this earth school, if you will. It's a hard-earned degree in earth schooling. And guess
Really?
what? If you ask me, we have signed up for this. We have signed up for this. They were asking like, who is going? I'm sure I was raising my hand, but maybe I was thinking I was raising my hand to go to the restroom. I don't know,
Right.
but I'm here. I am here. So thank you, John, for sharing this. And
Oh, thank you as well.
absolutely, absolutely. Because this, when we speak, and this is something that Joseph Campbell spoke, right? When we speak from our lives, right? We speak to the hearts, we change lives, because such experiences, they're very intimate, and we always take risks when we offer them. And at the same time, why won't we take risks, within community and communities that have interests that are able to understand, or even for a moment to suspend the disbelief and say, what could that be so for that individual? And that's enough.
Bad monkey.